How dare you defy your king?
Hey guys, tonight we will travel back in time more than 500 years to witness a scene both horrifying and mesmerizing. The legendary King Henry VIII, staggering, each final breath slowing down moment by moment, a royal tragedy filmed in chilling slow motion. You will not believe the secrets of power, ambition, and even the bloody schemes revolving around that mighty axe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you, so I can see how vast our community really is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now, we begin with the slow-motion but utterly bizarre descent into the death of Henry VIII, the once mighty representative of late Tudor power, a man defined by his wives, wars, and those infamously axe-related decisions. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to smash that like button, subscribe if you truly love this content, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, fire up a gentle fan for that soothing hum, and let's embark on this journey of exploratory discovery tonight. At the zenith of his glory, Henry VIII was the golden boy of Renaissance England. Tall, broad-shouldered, muscular, and utterly captivating in those snug tights. That image is immortalized in every royal portrait proclaiming him the triumphant sovereign. But by the 154 ties, his fate took a turn worthy of a horror film in slow motion. He ballooned to over 136 kilograms, suffered unrelenting leg ulcers, endured gout flares day and night, and reaped a catastrophic buffet of maladies from the court's "meat is manliness" diet. His transformation from dashing prince to colossal pudding warranted its own Greek tragedy with gravy. Yet this wasn't mere overindulgence. Henry was in perpetual agony, each joint aching, his ulcerated legs exuding a signature aroma no one wanted to breathe even in a 14th century tavern. He couldn't climb stairs, ride horses, or walk unaided. Still, the majestic king image had to persist. Portraits continued to flaunt those broad shoulders and eyes filled with divine purpose. Behind the scenes, however, it was a different story. His heavy armor fused to his throne, tailors racing against time. He wore a 54-inch belt around his waist. Courtiers dared not stand too close, and servants quietly prayed not to be assigned foot duty. Royal physicians tried everything: probing the ulcers, surgical lancing, honey and rose, oil poultices, even cauterization, all that resulted in nothing more than expensive linen soaked in that royal golden elixir history politely omits. Yet the most striking spectacle was still his legs. What began as a minor jousting wound in his 30s morphed into chronic horror deep, festering ulcers oozing continuously, daily treatment resembling a torture ritual. Foreign ambassadors visiting stifled their approach. Contemporary writers lamented the stench from afar. If Shakespeare had penned body horror, this opening scene would leave audiences shuddering. The initial injury from what seemed like a minor jousting accident turned out to be the starting point of a royal disaster. The king's physicians, the folk healers Henry VIII trusted more than his courtiers, were summoned relentlessly to concoct potions, perform acupuncture, apply bandages, and cauterize the sores on his legs. They slathered honey on the wounds, rubbed on rose oil, and even heated animal fat to sterilize the area in a divine mandate approach. Then came the ritual of burning the sores dry with hot coals to prevent the pus from spreading. Yet everything went downhill. The ulcers dug deeper, exposing bone, and the oozing pus soaked into luxurious silks, forcing those priceless garments to be burned after each use. The entire palace reeked of festering flesh. Courtiers walked with heads bowed, and foreign envoys had to clamp scented handkerchiefs over their noses during audiences. Henry himself lamented, "I have sat so long that my armor seems fused to my flesh." His words echoed the helpless cry of a king who once considered himself invincible. Henry's inability to move only compounded the problem. The less he walked, the more his blood pooled, the worse the ulcers became, which in turn made movement even more impossible. Thus, a vicious cycle of pain and helplessness ensued. Unable to burn energy, his body ballooned under the weight of illness. At banquets, he consumed nothing but meat from turkeys to roasted swans, washed down with cartloads of wine, and not a leaf of greens in sight. Such indulgence led to chronic gout, kidney stones, and painful skin fissures. By his final years, it was estimated that 60% of his body was pure Cabernet. To preserve the robust king image, the court devised a bespoke, mechanical chair, a plush, padded throne on wheels, pulled by pulleys. When Henry mounted a horse, they employed a small crane-like apparatus to lift him and the saddle. The sight was both bizarre and brutal, as though medieval weaponry had been fused with nascent industrial engineering. Physicians recommended Henry take a few steps of daily walking to relieve pressure, but he preferred political executions to exercise. Instead of burning calories, he burned the lives of unlucky courtiers. His mood swings became legendary. One moment, he wept for his late wife. The next, he erupted in fury at a minister for blinking too hard. The entire court lived in a whirlwind of emotional turmoil, and nobody dared to dissent even once. Henry VIII considered meat the ultimate symbol of power. The more meat on his plate, the more divine his rule appeared. His breakfast was not a simple meal, it was a banquet fit for at least 10 servants. Fried eggs, golden roasted beef cuts, beer-soaked bread, and occasionally an entire game bird. Meat wasn't just for eating, it was used to make sauce, savoured down to the last drip, ensuring not a morsel of fat went to waste. Vegetables or fruits played only a decorative role. Their bright colours were mere table ornaments, no one in the court dared touch them. And water? Forget it. Red wine flowed daily like the River Thames itself. Plain water was reserved for commoners. Even after his teeth had decayed beyond use, Henry insisted his meat be finely chopped before it reached his mouth, as if part of a red-themed religious ritual. According to royal estimates, he consumed up to 300 pounds of meat each year, 3 times that of an ordinary person. The crown had to import meat from across Europe to keep up with his insatiable appetite. Wild game, pasture beef, sea fish, all varieties had to be butchered and served before any bans could take effect. The consequences were inevitable. Henry's digestive tract resembled a constantly whistling pressure cooker. He suffered from bloating, acid reflux, and gas so severe that the court scheduled specific rumbles from the king as if they were a must-see symphony. Whenever Henry released gas, the nearest servants scrambled away, mindful that a misstep could cost their lives. The foul odour, recorded in letters of the time, drove courtiers to huddle in corners, pressing scented cloths to their faces, praying for the feast to end swiftly. The king's body flooded with toxins and his psyche declined. Henry became irritable, unleashing fits of rage for no reason. One moment he wept for his late wife. The next he ordered a noble's execution for a single glare. Life in the court was like walking a tightrope. No one dared challenge the king. Henry wielded his fury as a diplomatic tool. Instead of passing laws, he brandished his sword. Surviving a day in his presence was tougher than climbing a cliff. His movement shrank to mere pivots, supported by arms and wheeled chairs. Physicians urged him to take a few steps daily, but Henry preferred political executions to exercise. Ulcer pain and chronic gout provided plenty of excuses to remain still. Grand ceremonies and lavish banquets were reduced to seated affairs. Rituals shortened, speeches clipped. Even council meetings turned into guides on how to roll the king from one throne to another. Outside the palace, the people still saw a glamorous monarch. Portraits displayed him in resplendent robes, jeweled brooches, and a sparkling crown. Backstage, however, Henry was like a decaying wooden screen, repainted annually for show, while his body reeked and deteriorated. It was the bitter paradox of a great king. His image remained gleaming, but his flesh and spirit were utterly exhausted. Now, as Henry entered his final years, he was almost entirely immobile. The bed became his entire world, and any excursion outside it required an entourage of attendants and a rudimentary pulley system. Every minuscule movement, from twitching a toe to tilting his body, was calculated like an intricate formula. No one dared comment on the king's health. A single misstep in words could bring lifelong disaster. Court protocols had to pivot. The focus was no longer on displaying power, but on keeping the king from panic. Officials positioned a special chair in the room's corner, ensuring its angle never grazed his ulcer, while the palace installed fans to disperse the foul odor. The chair's fabric was infused with every pleasant fragrance available: rose, cinnamon, and more to mask the grim reality behind the curtains. Whenever the king shifted, the entire logistics team had to be on standby. The creak of wheels, the squeak of pulleys, and the raspy hiss of Henry's breaths created a bizarre symphony that no one could endure for long. Under Tudor law, predicting the monarch's final moment was treason. Thus, even as Henry hovered between life and death, no one dared declare him dead. The coffin and ceremonial garments stood ready, but they could only be displayed once the court issued an official decree. Meanwhile, internal bulletins circulated guarded phrases: "His Majesty rests deeply," or "The king is undergoing vigorous digestion." Oh, physicians and clergy took turns at his bedside, whispering only, "Let us pray for the king," fearing that any guarantee of recovery would be signing their own death warrant. The man who once ruled an empire drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally scrawling signatures on documents, amending his will, and hurriedly establishing a regency council for his 9-year-old son Edward. The court clung to the hope that the king would awaken to issue decrees, though everyone knew it was merely a tactic to finalize paperwork. Diplomatic letters from across Europe still inquired about an audience with the king, even as he had not moved from his bed for weeks. Asking when the end would come was forbidden. To do so was illegal, and could cost one's life. In that hushed chamber, only the hum of the fans, the creak of wheels, and the laboured breathing of a fading legend remained. Who dared dream of a new reign when the leader lay there, trapped in a starved, pain-racked body? It was the tragic paradox of a mighty king rendered powerless by his own flesh. Finally, on the 28th of January in the year 1547, Henry VIII drew his last breath. The royal chamber gave no outcry of mourning, only a suffocating silence. Courtiers blinked at one another, none daring to move or speak first. Declaring "the sovereign has died" required an official proclamation from the royal council. Until then, the court maintained the charade that His Majesty was merely taking his usual rest. Over the next several days, high officials busied themselves with the documents of succession, finalizing the will, drafting the decree, and informing the 9-year-old Prince Edward. Every ceremony unfolded in hushed tones, for Tudor custom strictly forbade direct references to death. Thus, instead of announcing "His Majesty has passed," courtiers delicately declared that "His Grace sleeps in peaceful repose." The scandal broke only when the royal corpse, once majestic, began to decompose. Chronic ulcers and deteriorating organs strained the coffin until it cracked, allowing bodily fluids to soak into the linen. During the funeral procession, the horse-drawn cortege stepped gingerly to avoid any loud noises or overt odors. A chronicler even recorded stray dogs stealthily licking the dripping fluids beneath the coffin, an image both horrifying and tragically ironic. The funeral rites were held in bone-chilling silence. The coffin received only cursory cleaning to conceal large stains underneath, and the Tudor eulogy simply read, "Offered unto the Lord." No grand trumpets sounded, no elaborate eulogies were delivered. The ceremony concluded swiftly, as if racing to outrun the very stench that haunted it. At last, Henry VIII was laid to rest beneath the floor of St. George's Chapel, beside Jane Seymour, the only wife who bore him a male heir. For over a century, his tomb bore no name, an anonymous slab beneath cold stone tiles. Only in the Victorian era did someone finally carve "Henry VIII, King of England" upon it. Thus ended the tragic saga of a once mighty ruler, from a conqueror of Europe to an unnamed figure beneath an unadorned memorial. When Henry VIII's final breath fell silent in the ornate royal chamber, England stepped into an unprecedented period of uncertainty. The 9-year-old Prince Edward, still tender and pale, was suddenly elevated by the council to the throne as Edward V. In reality, though, true power oscillated among the mighty noble families and the aging Lord Chancellor. The newly independent Church of England was still revising its canon laws, while France and the Roman Catholic powers quietly observed every move of the new regime. Across the broad realm from the grand streets of London to the rocky farmland of the countryside, the void of authority was palpable. Many provincial lords seized the moment to fortify their own power, doubling taxes, rearming their castles, even openly debating their loyalty to the young monarch. The common people were left bewildered, unsure whom to trust now that old King Henry had vanished. In the royal court, Catherine Parr, the sixth queen and Henry's final caretaker, found herself at a historic crossroads. Though officially retired and granted her personal freedom, she no longer bore the title of queen, yet maintained great influence. She swiftly turned her attention to protecting the late Jane Seymour's child, Prince Edward, while also supporting the drafting of a new Book of Common Prayer and championing education for women. Catherine became a patron of moderate religious reform and cultural pursuits, laying the groundwork for future changes. What of Henry's 6 earlier wives? The first two, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, though each suffered tragic fates and endured historical infamy, later inspired sympathy. Catherine of Aragon, deposed and exiled, was cared for by her Spanish family in her final years. News of her plight spread through embassies, stirring English regret for the misfortune of the first lawful wife. Anne Boleyn, accused perhaps falsely of adultery, gradually gained support from Romantic-era writers, who cast her as a symbol of the price paid for unfulfilled ambition. Jane Seymour, the only wife to bear Henry a son, Edward died soon after childbirth. Yet Henry VIII's decision to bury her beside himself in St. George's Chapel forever linked her image to the Tudor throne. Courtiers recalled how, in the early days of Edward's reign, they would remember the soft echo of her footsteps along palace corridors and the faint scent of rose that clung to her gowns. The two wives who followed Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard escaped the executioner's axe for political reasons. Anne of Cleves demonstrated remarkable shrewdness by preserving their marriage contract without losing her privileges. She lived comfortably on a royal estate, maintained a close friendship with Catherine Parr, and often hosted banquets with musicians and courtiers. Catherine Howard, Anne Boleyn's cousin, was executed for adultery and became a classic example of the ruthless injustices of the court. As for Prince Edward, though he held the title of king, he was merely an inexperienced child. The court lauded him with flowery praise, but real authority resided with the Regency Council. During Edward's early years, he received instruction in reading, writing, and history under Catherine Parr's patronage, she who dreamed of creating advanced education for the nobility. Edward V lived under immense pressure, every breath recorded, every gesture scrutinized. Rumor had it that if the boy king failed to recover quickly, a succession crisis might ignite civil war. Not only did politics tremble, but religion was thrown into turmoil. Henry VIII had broken with the Roman Church to make himself supreme head of the Church of England. Now the English Church sought to maintain its firm stance against Rome, while facing pressure for comprehensive reform. Some moderate bishops supported the new Book of Common Prayer, while conservative prelates vehemently opposed it. English settlers in Ireland and Scotland feared that religious division might spark separatist uprisings and bloody border clashes. Meanwhile, ordinary people remained absorbed in their daily toil, ploughing fields, weaving cloth, fishing in the North Sea. They paid little heed to court intrigues, hoping only for fair weather, ample harvests, and to avoid having tax collectors strip them bare. Yet even in rural hearthside gatherings, tales of the bold, decisive, and ruthless king persisted. Henry VIII became a figure both feared and fascinating, as much a legend recounted around cottage fires as a cautionary tale. Decades later, when Edward V died young, Henry VIII was remembered as the ultimate royal symbol of a dramatic dynasty. From the imposing castles of Westminster to the enduring religious institutions he shaped, Henry's legacy remained etched into the realm. England grew steadier with time, but the story of the king who wielded an axe and law to carve his name into history would haunt generations to come. So we have journeyed together through the final, tragic chapter of Henry VIII's life, from his physical agony to the legal drama surrounding his eternal rest. But don't turn off the fan or wrap yourself in your blanket just yet. Our exploration of this emperor is far from over. Next, we will strip away 10 contradictory facets of Henry VIII's character and reign. 5 vices that made him an icon of ruthless power, and 5 virtues that reveal a surprisingly humane, even pioneering side. You will discover a Henry VIII who was not only the master of the executioner's axe, but also a reformer bold enough to defy the Vatican. Not just a hedonistic monarch, but also a rare father deeply invested in education. Prepare yourself, because each scheme and each achievement will be laid bare, helping you understand this Tudor king in a light that is as fierce as it is sleep-inducing. After witnessing the tragic consequences of unchecked power in that slow-motion finale, we now delve deeper into the 5 vices that made Henry VIII the very symbol of cruelty. Each vice will reveal a darker facet of the Tudor reign, like each agonizing slice of that notorious king's flesh wounds. Vice number 1. Absolute violence. The tyrant's axe. Now we begin to uncover the first terrible vice of this infamous monarch. Absolute violence, or more precisely his obsession with the axe. You might picture a splendid, majestic sovereign claiming his crown, but behind that radiance lay a soul endlessly craving to see blood spurt from an axe blade. Henry VIII did not wield hammers or swords. He believed only the axe had the proper gravitas to fell any foe, from a crowned rival to a guest at his own banquet. From the moment he ascended the throne, Henry made it clear he was not the kind of king who merely granted mercy. He was equally eager to grant execution. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, though spared the chop, came close to death when she was deposed and confined to a convent. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, did not escape the axe. Accused of adultery, she lost her head one bleak morning. And it did not end there. Anne's former advisor, Thomas Cromwell, once among Henry's most powerful counsellors, also faced the axe, simply because the king believed Cromwell had turned Anne against him. Members of Parliament and foreign ambassadors had to master the encyclopedia of menace before entering the court. Anyone smiling too brightly or blinking too emphatically risked landing on the traitor list. Imagine a royal feast. Music swells, candles flicker, yet in the far corner, elegant statues remind all of the unfortunate souls who had perished. The dashing king sat at the centre, eyes following every step of his courtiers, ready to snap. That head no longer suits me, bring me the axe. Henry VIII's execution ledger stretched out like a parchment scroll. Beyond his 2 wives, there was little Guy Fawkes, that is, Sir Thomas More, once a trusted friend, then banished. Next came Thomas Cromwell, and countless other nobles. Even long-time confidants such as Hussey and Morton did not escape the blade. In those few years in the 1540s, the court became a grim gallery of living tombs. Whenever word spread that Henry was enraged, another head fell. The psychological impact on courtiers and commoners alike was indescribable. No one dared put pen to parchment without first curbing every impulse. Each time the rasp of an axe being sharpened echoed through the palace, hearts froze and pulses raced. A routine audience with the king became a game of guess the monarch's mood. A frown meant someone's life. A forced smile might grant a sudden pardon. Strangely, Henry even staged public axe-wielding demonstrations to keep everyone in line. He invited curious onlookers to witness a special trial, where the judge, that is, Henry himself pronounced sentence, and then executed it with his own hand. The crowd cheered and gasped, creating a macabre spectacle amid the candlelit grandeur of the palace. This brutality persisted even as Henry's health began to fail. With a sore back and festering leg ulcers, he could no longer swing the axe with the former force. Yet the memory of that violence remained ingrained in the court's collective consciousness. Everyone kept their distance. Council chambers were arranged so the king would not brush his wounds, and execution platforms were moved to the far side of the hall to prevent blood and pus from splattering the velvet drapes. Even with his weary, cold gaze, Henry VIII reminded the nobility, "I hold absolute power. Anyone who dares to oppose me, stand up, and I will settle this." Thus his axe did more than sever necks. It severed all hope of peaceful existence within the Tudor court. Looking back, absolute violence was not merely a personal vice, but a massive psychological wound inflicted upon an entire dynasty. Every drop of falling steel spread fear, ensuring that however drowsy one might be, the image of the impending axe would haunt every waking moment. Vice number 2. Gluttony of the crown. Now, after experiencing the ruthless terror of the axe, we turn to Henry VIII's second terrible vice. Gluttony, or more dramatically, the crown's indulgence. Picture a lavish royal banquet where hundreds of kilograms of meat are laid out. Dozens of large flagons of red wine flow freely, and 100 cooks, musicians, and attendants buzz around in a grand display of wealth. Each feast was more than a meal, it was a showcase of absolute power. Beef, venison, game fowl, even roasted swans. Heavy loaves, soaked in ale. Eggs, fish, and seafood, no delicacy was spared. Every dish was marinated, glazed with animal fat, honey, and wine. Vegetables were mere garnishes meant to frame the mountain of meat. The result? Henry VIII not only became grossly overweight, but suffered a relentless array of ailments, gout tormenting every joint, kidney stones racking his insides, and worst of all, his leg ulcers stemming from the strain of his massive weight and his meat-only diet. By his 50th year, his knees groaned under the load, prompting the invention of a motorized chair on wheels to move him around the palace. The royal physicians endured a second torment diagnosing him. They prescribed painkillers, diuretics, but Henry kept eating. At every next feast, he devoured more stews, more venison, more wine. Yearly estimates pegged his meat consumption at nearly 136 kilograms, a triple portion for a typical noble of the era. His red wine drinking was measured in large flagons. Plain water was strictly a commoner's beverage. Over time, the effects permeated palace life. The lingering stench of wine, the greasy residue on the tiled floors, and the quiet mutters of servants as the king once again basked in his royal aroma. Through the eyes of his subjects, the once glorious sovereign gradually morphed into the figure of a bloated noble, weak and feeble. Portraits and statuary continued to depict his grandeur, but behind them everyone knew of his puffy cheeks, cracked skin, and exhausted smile. Beyond the loss of dignity, his declining health impaired his ability to rule. Whenever a court crisis arose, the king would need to gorge on a colossal meal before resting to digest. Thus, gluttony of the crown was not merely a private vice, but a national malady that disrupted state affairs. Thus, the second vice of Henry VIII, gluttony of the crown, paints a harrowing portrait. A monarchy squeezed by a widened waistline, authority eclipsed by gout and ulcers, and the once mighty emperor's image reduced to a platter overflowing with meat. Vice number 3, monarch's hubris. Moving on from sumptuous feasts and monstrous appetites, we arrive at Henry VIII's third vice, ultimate hubris, or more bluntly, a colossal ego rivaling the divine. Picture a king enthroned in majestic regalia, convinced that neither the Pope nor Parliament could stand on equal footing with him. From his youth, Henry boldly declared his absolute supremacy. "I am God on earth." Perhaps not in those exact words, but certainly in spirit. He believed his crown was divinely bestowed, and any opposition, whether religious or political, had to be crushed without hesitation. Then, in 1525, he officially broke away from the Roman Church to establish the Church of England, crowning himself its supreme head. For the sake of being a true God on earth, Henry severed all ties with the Vatican. The political fallout struck like a storm. Angry cardinals in Rome, a surge of dissent within the royal court, and hopeful parliamentarians ready to tighten their grip on power. But Henry unleashed his trump card, the Supremacy Act, demanding that every subject swear loyalty to him first, then to the Holy Trinity. Anyone who refused instantly became a traitor, facing loss of office, property, or even banishment. This crisis swept across the realm. The senior cardinal in London was forced to swear allegiance or face execution. Parliament split into warring factions of royalists and Vatican loyalists, creating a high-stakes drama. Ordinary people were left bewildered, unsure who to worship, king or clergy. Meanwhile, Henry strutted around his court, his command of armies intact, but his pride instilling fear in many. His hubris was further demonstrated by his self-styled preamble to official documents. "We, Henry, King of England and Supreme Head of the Church of England," before any other officials were even mentioned. At council meetings, no one dared meet his gaze or come prepared with arguments, fearing they wouldn't be deemed sufficiently worthy. Instead, they whispered amendments, word by word, terrified of committing an offence. As the crisis deepened, so did Henry's delight. He believed in infinite personal power, dismantle rival authorities, and he would remain invincible. This continued even into his final ailing years. Despite festering wounds and gout, his self-importance did not wane. He insisted on a full coronation ceremony, personally swearing the oath, granting pardons, and reasserting his position as God on earth. Looking back, Monarch's hubris was not merely a personal flaw but the underlying cause of political upheaval, court infighting, and widespread distrust. Each decision to break from Rome, or position his throne beside the divine, cut deep into the kingdom's unity, leaving consequences that echoed through generations. And even if one were drifting off to sleep, the image of a king who crowned himself a new deity would keep any listener's eyes wide open, hearts pounding in suspense. Vice number 4. Impulsive wrath. Moving on from his colossal ego and schism from the church, we confront Henry VIII's fourth vice: impulsive wrath, sudden, explosive outbursts. Picture a typical day in the Tudor court. The king frowns, narrows his eyes, and in an instant, an unfortunate courtier vanishes from office. No formal trial, no drawn-out proceedings, just one dissatisfied flick of the eye, and it's over. From his youth, Henry displayed impatience. At a banquet, a courtier's offhand joke would draw a snide smirk. By dawn, that courtier might be summoned, only to receive an execution warrant instead of an explanation. Catherine of Aragon witnessed her husband's temper flare. Because she frowned when someone mentioned her mother, Henry stripped her of her queenly status and confined her to a nunnery. Anne Boleyn, his second wife, couldn't escape either. Suspected of infidelity after a too loud laugh at a feast, she lost her head the next morning. Councillors soon became emotional weather forecasters. They dared not draft documents openly. Instead, they exchanged furtive glances, gingerly guessing the king's mood. Rumour held that a kingly grimace during cheerful laughter could doom someone by nightfall. Conversely, a reluctant smile could unexpectedly grant pardons. Once, a noble spilled a cup too vigorously, and Henry, startled as if challenged, sent him into exile in windswept Cornwall, never to be heard from again. Henry wielded his wrath as political weaponry. Instead of passing acts or negotiating, he personally stormed into foreign embassies, face flushed, finger pointed, axe brandished. Ambassadors, terrified yet respectful, applauded like spectators at a bloody play. The message was clear. No need for formal agreements. Fear and fury sufficed. At tense moments, the court held impromptu internal inquiries to discover what had angered the king. Reports had to arrive within hours, or the scribes faced leaving dinner empty-handed. Everyone held their breath, awaiting the red-sealed proclamation. His Majesty demands explanation. Unwilling to endure lengthy justifications, Henry would snap. Too many words fetch the axe. Psychologically, this impulsiveness cast a dark shadow over the palace. Everyone lived as if under a shower of axes, unpredictable and relentless. They withdrew from grand halls, lurking in the shadows like frightened spectres, fearing the next lightning bolt of royal fury. Ironically, this rashness imposed strict order. Who dared be loud or sluggish? Court became a race against the king's temper. Henry even staged mock summary judgments. Officials gathered. Henry pronounced verdicts, struck his weapon of office fast, efficient, terrifying. These sentences travelled across the realm like ominous dispatches. He does not jest. And though one might be sleepy, no one could close their eyes imagining that hushed whisper, "His wrath is on the move," followed by the rasp of a whetstone sharpening an axe. That is Henry VIII's fourth vice. Impulsive wrath, fueling chaos, yet enforcing iron discipline, compelling all in the Tudor court to remain perpetually alert. Vice number 5. Legal cruelty. Following his explosive temper, we arrive at Henry VIII's fifth vice, legal cruelty, or more precisely, the perversion of law under Tudor rule. If you think only the axe inspires dread, you're mistaken. Tudor statutes, vague and ominous, were far more terrifying than any blade. From the start, Henry recognized the power of words to criminalize dissent. The formula was simple. Anyone daring to speak disagreement, even a whispered complaint, could be charged with treason. Acts were drafted so ambiguously they formed a trap of legalese. A mild criticism of war levies, a furtive glance that seemed disrespectful, or a satirical verse all became damning evidence. Trials became a bureaucratic killing machine. Judges, actually staunch royal loyalists, would read the predetermined accusation and pronounce sentence. No real proof, no defense counsel, no jury, just a verdict pre-written in the king's office. Those named barely understood what they were charged with before being led to their doom. Picture a trial day. Great hall lit by countless candles, courtiers watching silently like theatre-goers at a grisly play. One noble is called, stares wide-eyed, as judges proclaim the sentence. A single hammer strike on the bench signals loss of lands, titles, and often life. The crowd applauds more from fear than celebration applause to keep the chilling hush at bay. Henry's goal was unequivocal. Crush any opposition faction. Catholic hardliners, Parliament-minded nobles, none escaped legal reconciliation. No public debate, no forum, just forced silence, executed notoriety, or banishment. The impact on public trust was catastrophic. Commoners heard tales of absurd indictments, fearful of speaking out. Civic discourse died. They no longer believed law served justice. They saw it as the king's instrument of terror. Foreign ambassadors spread the legend of Tudor law worse than invasion. The threat of prosecution chilled any open dialogue. Many envoys declined direct audiences, sending curt letters instead, dreading a similar fate. Hilariously grim, Henry even staged mock trials, gathered officials, pronounced sentences, waved the royal quill instead of an axe. But the effect was the same: terror and control. As he aged, weakened by illness, legal cruelty remained his final safeguard. Officials meticulously vetted every document, fearful of inadvertent missteps. Thus Tudor court became a silent chamber of arbitrary law, an underworld of whispered warnings. Don't disagree, letters may indict. The palace ceased to represent fair justice. It became a stage of perpetual fear. In the end, legal cruelty was not only a personal flaw but a deep wound to the dynasty and realm. Commoners couldn't sleep, never knowing when the law would again slit their hopes. Even in drowsiness, the spectre of those cunning statutes haunted every restless mind under Henry VIII. The law was the ultimate punishment. So we've just nodded off, alongside the darkness hidden behind Henry VIII's mask of power. From the blood-soaked axe to the tear-drenched statutes. But don't turn off the lights yet, there are still 5 shining facets of this Tudor king that we haven't explored. From his daring political moves to his passion for art and religion, Henry VIII was not only a ruthless ruler, he also possessed qualities that commanded Europe's respect. Brace yourselves, keep that fan humming quietly, and your blanket cozy. The next segment will reveal 5 surprising strengths of Henry VIII. You'll learn that he didn't merely wield an axe to punish, but also picked up a pen to draft ecclesiastical law. He didn't just imprison traitors, but also encourage scholarship and patronize the arts. Coming up, we will uncover the 5 halos that shine and keep you wide awake around this contradictory king. But for now, take a deep breath, relax your body, and let's move into the section on the 5 virtues of Henry VIII. Virtue number 1, patron of learning. Now, with the lights still dim and the fan humming softly by your ear, let us explore an entirely different facet of Henry VIII, a king known not merely for his axe, but also for his pen and books. Henry long understood that his reign could not endure solely on the power of the sword. He needed the weapon of knowledge. Thus, he founded the Royal School at Greenwich, where future princes and nobles were instructed in mathematics, literature, and even classical Latin. But he did not stop there. Henry established the Royal Institute of Studies, gathering leading scholars from across Europe, and built a splendid library filled with precious volumes, rare manuscripts, and archaeological records. Henry VIII was not a ruler who merely gave orders, he was also an active patron of scholars. He employed a team of professional translators responsible for rendering classical Latin works, such as Augustine's De Civitate Dei and Pliny's Naturalis Historia, into English. As a result, the nobility and educated classes no longer had to rely solely on clerks or monks to understand important texts. They could access ancient wisdom right in the capital, ushering in an early age of enlightenment in England. His educational policies also shaped royal family life. He insisted not only that his sons, but also his daughters be literate, inviting the finest tutors to teach Prince Edward and Princess Elizabeth. He believed that a wise king would rule more justly, and a literate princess would enrich the royal culture. From Whitehall to Hampton Court, the rustle of parchment and the scratch of quill became commonplace sounds, replacing the haunting quiet of infirmaries. For the first time, the court saw Henry not in gleaming armor, but in a scholar's robe, holding a slip of paper, announcing a newly acquired book. He did not hesitate to spend hours reading manuscripts, offering suggestions to translators, and even revising phrasing to ensure the original author's intent was faithfully conveyed. Occasionally, in the midst of tense council meetings, Henry would nod in satisfaction upon spotting a significant Latin passage on the table. Thanks to these contributions, Henry VIII ignited a passion for learning not only within the palace but across the kingdom. Nobles began sending their children to Greenwich, private academies sprouted around London, and books became cherished commodities. Common folk, hearing rumours of lectures at the Royal Library, would pass along tales of the noble king, who opened the doors to learning. If your eyes are growing heavy, breathe deeply and drift into the image of Henry VIII seated with scholars by candlelight, a vision perhaps far removed from the king we have come to know. Yet, this is his legacy, a deliberate effort to build his realm through education, gifting England a foundation of knowledge upon which to step into a new era. Virtue number 2, religious reformer. Now, with the fan still whirring and the lamp casting its soft glow, let us delve into another controversial but undeniable facet of Henry VIII. He was the bold challenger to Rome's power and laid the foundations for the Church of England. When you hear the phrase, "break from the Roman Church," you might imagine a rash decision, yet behind it was a profoundly courageous, religious, and political strategy. From the outset of his reign, Henry refused to accept subservience to Rome. He believed that if the English Church remained under papal authority, the crown would forever be entangled in the Pope's grasp. Consequently, Henry proclaimed himself as the supreme head of the Church of England, vesting in himself the right to adjudicate all ecclesiastical matters within his realm. This decision, part personal ambition, part desire for control, shattered centuries of dependence and birthed a new institution, the Church of England. But Henry did not stop at seizure of authority. He also commissioned the creation of the Book of Common Prayer, replacing Latin rites with services in English. With this book, the faithful across England could participate in worship directly in their mother tongue, rather than silently relying on Latin-only clergy. Imagine villagers in far-flung hamlets opening the slender volume to recite prayers at their own hearths, instead of merely observing clerical rituals. This was nothing short of a religious revolution. Balancing old and new doctrines was no simple task. Henry retained the 7 sacraments, emphasized the monarch's ecclesiastical supremacy, yet embraced Protestant ideals by encouraging personal engagement with scripture and liturgy. Through the Book of Common Prayer, Protestantism in England gained an official framework. Laypeople were urged to read, discuss, and internalize their faith, moving beyond rote ritual. The reaction from both the royal court and Rome was explosive. Cardinals denounced Henry as a heretic, threatening excommunication. Yet Henry, armed with both secular and spiritual power, enacted the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself the sole supreme head of the Church of England. Thereafter, any cleric or noble opposing royal ecclesiastical authority was deemed a traitor to the crown. This bold move forced many bishops to kneel in acquiescence, whilst monasteries, once wealthy, were dissolved, their assets redirected to the royal treasury. The legacy of this political religious reform endures in England's religious landscape. The Church of England not only survived, but thrived under subsequent monarchs. Anglican clerics became leading reformers in education and culture. The archbishoprics of Canterbury and York remained direct successors to Henry's revolutionary order. And though the Book of Common Prayer has undergone revisions, it remains a cornerstone of Anglican worship today. Naturally, these changes inflicted wounds upon Rome and deepened schisms. But in that weary yet resolute tone, Henry VIII demonstrated he was no mere executioner wielding an axe. He was also a religious innovator bold enough to reshape his nation's spiritual life. Even if you're drifting towards sleep, picture Henry seated amidst surging candlelight, pen in quivering hand, channeling fervour into the pages of the Book of Common Prayer, forging a new path for English faith. Thus, amid the darker traits that made him fearsome, Henry VIII also possessed a visionary zeal to recast England's religious destiny, a legacy both dazzling and sleeplessly haunting. For who could imagine a king of axe and pen reshaping an entire church so profoundly? Virtue number 3, novel innovator. Now, with the fan still humming and the lamp casting its mellow glow, our story sails further into Henry VIII's Michael Phelps era of naval dominance. He wasn't just a theological or educational monarch, he bet on the sea's power to guard England as a wolf shields its flock at night. From the dawn of his reign, Henry realized that a kingdom strong on land alone was incomplete. He drafted grand plans for a mighty navy, cutting import taxes to fund shipbuilding, refurbishing Portsmouth and Chatham docks, and patronizing the launch of flagship warships like the Mary Rose and the Henry Grace Adieu. These vessels were not only bristling with cannons, but engineered to withstand the Atlantic's furious swells, training green sailors to fire broadside from bone-rattling decks. Henry even recruited Europe's finest shipwrights, summoning masters from Venice and Genoa to tutor English craftsmen. Each new ship was a marvel: expansive decks for artillery, reinforced hulls for ramming enemy vessels, and towering masts, enabling lookouts to survey at least 10 leagues out to sea. Picture crews, quivering on deck beneath billowing sails, thinking, "This king gives us no chance to admire the scenery or stroll ashore." The naval arms race against perennial rivals Spain and France soon roared to life. The Spanish admiral bristled at English warships patrolling off Iberia, while the French secretly scouted the new English yards at Whitby. Not to be outdone, Henry issued letters of marque to privateers like Sir Francis Drake, legally empowering them to seize Spanish galleons laden with gold. These state-sanctioned piracy raids filled England's coffers and sowed terror in enemy hearts. Yet not all naval clashes unfolded on open seas. Henry staged elaborate live-fire drills for foreign dignitaries. Cannon blasts echoed like thunder, smoke curled skyward through white sails, and visiting nobles from France stood slack, jawed on the quayside, muttering, "Perhaps we should keep a safe distance." Henry's fleet became a symbol of royal might at sea. When Spain mobilized hundreds of ships for revenge, England had its own formidable armada ready, leading to the so-called Spanish Armada disaster. Brief storms and superior naval tactics, born of Henry's shipbuilding policies, scattered the Spanish fleet, ushering in England's maritime supremacy for centuries. Henry's naval power was not merely martial, it was a statement of regal authority over the ocean. Even as the Spanish Armada loomed, the English fleet, thanks to Henry's foresight, stood ready. The blunderbuss diplomacy of privateering and royal arsenals made England a dominant naval force. The legacy of Henry's sea power is undeniable in England's naval history. Successive kings inherited the shipyards and dockyards he established. By the 17th century, England's rising maritime empire spanning the Americas, Africa and Asia owed its roots to Henry's pioneering investments. Despite his ailments, aching joints and festering sores, Henry was revered by sailors as the father of England's navy. His policies on shipbuilding, seamanship training, and harbour construction boosted commerce and created livelihoods for thousands. Fishermen and dockworkers alike found stability in his vision. Occasionally, at court, Henry would inquire through breathless portraits of his naval captains. "All's well? Should we mount more cannons on the starboard side?" Though laboured, his voice would light up at reports of patrols near Scotland or mastheads slicing through the clouds. So, whether you find yourself drowsy or not, remember Henry VIII was more than an icy axe wielder. He was also the architect of England's naval greatness, a man wielding axe, compass, and drafting pen to forge a fleet that made enemies quake at the sound of rolling waves. Virtue number 4, architect of modern monarchy. Now, with the fan still softly humming and the light flickering, let us drift into a historic turning point. Henry VIII, as the very first modern monarch architect. He wielded more than an axe and stood at the helm of a mighty navy. He moulded a governance system, far more structured, ushering England from fragmented feudalism into centralized authority. Soon after securing his throne, Henry recognized the inefficiency of an overgrown court bureaucracy. He set about streamlining, merging justice with finance departments for efficiency, and elevating Parliament into a legitimator of royal decrees. No longer did he rule by private proclamation alone, now statutes passed through parliamentary assent. Gradually, the English Parliament became an indispensable partner, siring future legislative power. He also codified court ceremony, from how courtiers bowed to the order of royal banquets into a precise, uniform protocol. He standardized royal attire. The court donned only crimson and ivory, distinguishing factions at a glance. Coronations followed a step-by-step formula: procession, anointing, oath, then feast, eliminating the old scramble for favours and the awkwardness of unranked nobles. Henry reformed the law into clearer statutes. He issued edicts requiring open trials, curbing secret judgments, though true fairness remained elusive. Most crucially, Henry compiled the first royal etiquette book, a handbook listing each official's duties and limits. Violations triggered set penalties, ending the era of every region its own code. This transformation propelled England from feudal oligarchy, where local lords commanded their fiefdoms, to a centralised monarchy. Power concentrated in Westminster, guided by council and parliament, enabling swift crisis management, rebellions, invasions, or fiscal shortfalls. No longer reliant on dozen independent baronies, national issues met collective debate and resolution within a single assembly. Posterity recalls Henry VIII as planting the seeds of government by the people, for the people, albeit initially for the gentry. Parliament gained clout, bicameral legislature emerged, and eventually franchise extended to the burgeoning middle class. The seeds sown under Henry's seemingly quiet reforms sprouted into genuine representative government. You may be drifting towards sleep, but remember, a well-organized state endures. Henry VIII knew it better than most. He wielded pen and parchment as deftly as axe, to cement monarchy not just by force, but by law and ceremony. His reformed court fostered merit. His regulations clarified power, and change became feasible. Naval offices, royal coffers, even early hospitals modernized in his wake. Records of the first parliamentary session under Henry show robed MPs debating under stern formality, then casting votes. This marked the birth of representative governance, no longer mere royal puppets. They had voices. Even if you're half asleep now, envision those solemn gentlemen, hand on the king's books of rules, as the dawn of a new era. And that is why, though Henry remains notorious for his ruthless acts, he is also lauded as the architect of modern monarchy. His legacy lies not in sword or cannon, but in the laws penned, the court protocols set, and a parliament born. All would steer England toward prosperity through succeeding reigns and haunt our thoughts, sleepy as we are, with the memory of his indelible imprint on Europe's map of power. Virtue number 5, benevolent patron. With the fan still whispering and the light gently flickering, we now drift into the final solace, before concluding our exploration of Henry VIII's halo of glory, his charitable endeavours, known as the benevolent patron. Even if your eyes grow heavy tonight, resist sleep for a moment to witness how this conflicted king scattered compassion across his realm. At the heart of London, Henry VIII founded the first hospital named Street Thomas the Almoner's House, a refuge for the poor, wounded veterans and the homeless. Spacious wards lined with soft pallets stood in rows, each equipped with a bowl of hot broth and fresh bread. He allocated massive royal funds to hire the finest doctors in Europe and ensured monthly food shipments of thousands of loaves and gallons of porridge to both the hospital and 6 auxiliary shelters. Henry also established comfort houses in 5 major cities: London, York, Bristol, Norwich, and Newcastle, for elderly widows and war orphans. He replaced flimsy roofs with sturdy tiles, installed stained glass windows, and furnished each room with a fireplace and miniature library. He provided warm clothing, shoes, and interest-free loans to launch small farms or shops. During harsh winters, Henry dispatched boats loaded with firewood and coal to homes, preventing anyone from freezing. When the plague struck in 1543, Henry did not avert his eyes. He ordered the opening of 2 quarantine centres with 4 wooden wings and straw-filled beds. Nutritious meals arrived daily, and cutting-edge medical supplies were imported. Within the first month, he spent gold to procure plague vaccines from Italian apothecaries and invited renowned physicians from Florence. News of the king's care spread, spurring citizens to donate candles, dried onions, and cloth masks, sparking a "Fight the Plague with the King" movement. Beyond healthcare, the crown held public feasts to soothe hunger and despair. Each sharing day, the court distributed free vegetables, salted meats, dried fruits, and apple cider in Westminster Square. Minstrels played, and crowds queued for gifts. Henry appeared in crimson robes, greeting each person warmly, inquiring into their welfare. bringing tears of gratitude. After the floods of 1546 in the Avon Valley, fields lay submerged. Henry promptly sent 3 ships loaded with grain and soldiers to evacuate villages. He instructed local lords, "Do not let your people starve." He suspended regional taxes for 6 months and released reserves from royal granaries. Villagers recall the king aboard a flat-bottomed barge, listening to their laments, a legendary act of solidarity. Charity under Henry VIII was not merely crisis response, but enduring policy. He established the Royal Patronage Fund, managed by 3 noble trustees, to distribute relief to orphans, the poor, and the disabled. Annual disbursements reached thousands of pounds sterling, a significant share of the treasury. Courtiers once wondered, where does all this gold come from? Yet they noted that charity alone mitigated social strife and prevented uprisings. The image of a benevolent king settled in popular memory. In freezing winters, families gathered by hearths, recalling the days King Henry distributed free bread, remarking, "It warmed us as if we dined in the palace." Folk songs celebrated him, a warrior with sword and a giver of bread, praising his dual roles. No matter how drowsy you feel, you cannot shake the vision of riverside hospitals, white tents in muddy fields, and his hands offering bowls of porridge to each patient. This was the charitable side of the Tudor king, a gentle glow amid bloodshed and politics. When Henry died, the people mourned not only the loss of power, but the passing of a compassionate father who led them through their darkest hours. We've just taken a stroll through the dramatic life of Henry VIII, from the bone-chilling atrocities to the rare glimmers of compassion in this Tudor monarch's heart. So, after more than 1 hour immersed in royal tales, steeped in bloodshed and benevolence, what can viewers take away? First, this is not merely a journey through time, but also a reminder of the value of balancing power with kindness. Henry VIII wielded the axe, the law, and his own arrogance to hold the throne. Yet he never forgot to found hospitals, build schools, and support the poor. In modern life, we learn that anyone with authority, whether a manager, a leader, or simply someone influential within a family, must also cultivate a generous heart. Second, by examining the 5 vices and 5 virtues of Henry, we uncover the multifaceted nature of humanity. We see not only a brutal tyrant, but also a religious reformer, a father who cared about education, a patron of culture, and a naval innovator. The lesson is never to judge someone by a single trait, for it is complexity that defines us. In our daily work and interactions, understanding rather than judgment fosters more durable relationships. Third, this video underscores the role of critical thinking when engaging with history. Henry VIII is neither entirely a vilified villain nor a flawless hero. He was a product of his age, pressured by politics, religion, and physiology. In an era flooded with information, viewing history through an analytical lens helps us avoid repeating mistakes and apply lessons from the past to shape our future. Finally, the greatest value you can take from this video is the ability to reflect on yourself. Ask yourself, in my own life, am I using an axe, whether power, words, or pressure, to treat others too harshly? Am I neglecting the hospitals I could build small acts of compassion to warm the hearts of those around me? Balancing strength with gentleness, decisiveness with empathy, is the key to living fully and meaningfully. Thus ends our exploration of Henry VIII, a king of endless contradictions who left behind not just the wreckage of a throne and a bloody axe, but also legacies of charity, education, and faith. I hope that after you switch off that gentle fan, you'll carry with you the inspiration to build your own hospitals, whether through a smile, an encouraging word, or a simple act of kindness. And lastly, good night if you're still awake, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you won't miss our newest and best videos. We'll see you on the next thrilling journey through history.